Sup y'all, it's me, it's your boy Asmongold, and today I had a chance to get on the PTR, get a group together, and do the Black Temple Timewalking raid. Now, whenever this was announced, I'll be honest, I was a little bit skeptical based on how Molten Core event went, but at the same time, I was curious and also hopeful. And after doing the whole raid, going through the whole thing, killing Illidan, I had a good time, and it was actually an enjoyable experience for the most part. So I wanted to share that with you guys today and offer a little bit of criticism and feedback, what I think it could do better, and what I already think it does very well. Now, it goes without saying that this is on the PTR, which means that all of the footage that you're going to be seeing in this video might not necessarily be what's going to be going directly to live. Now, if you want to queue up for this yourself, all you have to do is go onto the PTR, get a group of 8 to 30 people together. There's an NPC in Shatwrath, and there are 2 conditions that you have to meet in order to queue up for these. And by the way, shout out to Mr. Game Master Reviews, who helped me while I was doing this on my channel. Thanks a lot, man. This would have not even happened if it weren't for you telling us this, because I had no idea how to even queue up for this thing, because it's like really buggy. So the 2 things that you have to do is you have to make sure that everybody is near the NPC whenever you queue up for the raid. And the second thing is you have to make sure that everybody is on the same PTR server. There are multiple servers on the PTR, but make sure everybody is on the exact same server, even though you can invite cross-realm. If you can meet those 2 conditions, everybody's around the NPC, everybody's on the same server, you should be able to queue up if you're in a group of 8 to 30 people. Now, my understanding is that this isn't going to be queuable whenever it comes out, but at this point there might be a group finder for it. I'm just not quite sure yet. The way that they worded it, it was a little bit unclear. I hope they make it to where you're not able to queue for it, because there's a lot of things that you can do to troll people in this instance that makes it very annoying for other people. And the difficulty of the instance, I feel like if you have one person doing something wrong and wiping the whole group, it might lead to a lot of problems if they did actually make this directly queuable, like LFR or looking for group. So anyway, I think we had like I think we started with 30 people and we ended with like 21. We had some clowns that I had to get rid of, and you also had some people that had disconnection issues. Now, the loot that it dropped was item level 900, and it looked like it warforged up to 915. Now, 900, of course, is the base item level for Mythic Nighthold, and this is significantly easier than Mythic Nighthold. However, it was difficult to a certain degree. If I was going to place a level of difficulty on the raid, I would say that it was somewhere between maybe like Heroic Emerald Nightmare and Normal Nighthold. Somewhere between those, and maybe like the first half of Normal Nighthold bosses, it was about that hard. But almost all of the bosses we were able to brute force down, although I did know a lot of the mechanics. I remembered them from back in the day because I used to raid Black Temple, so that made doing the raid a little bit easier. We had a few different wipes. We one-shot Nagentis. We wiped a number of times on Supremus. We didn't understand the Hateful Strike mechanic that applied to melee, and also we aggroed Trash. We wiped on Shade of a Comma because somebody pulled things on accident. Actually, it wasn't on accident. They were fucking stupid. And we also wiped on Gert Blood Boil, and we didn't wipe on any of the other bosses. One of my main criticisms for the raid is that I don't really feel like Illidan or the Illidari Council was bugged out, so it wasn't really a real fight. But I don't really feel like even Mother Shiraz or Illidan were that much more difficult than Supremus or or Nagentis, the first bosses. And I'd like to see more of a increasing difficulty of the bosses, with maybe the last 3 or 4 bosses that used to drop tier gear also dropping maybe 905 baseline gear, just to make it a little bit better and also make it more difficult, to where it feels like you're actually progressing through the raid and you go through more and more difficult bosses. Now, it also goes without saying that you are scaled down in this raid. The Molten Core event, you were scaled up, but with this one, you were scaled down to item level 141, which is the baseline item level for most of the Black Temple loot, outside of the tier gear and the Illidan Stormrage and Illidari Council gear. So, doing the raid, we got into it, and we got the first trash pack. Actually took like maybe 10 or 30 seconds to kill. I was expecting to just like whirlwind through that shit like it's no big deal, because the rest of the time-walking dungeons are easy. But to be honest, this shit was way harder. And so we're killing trash, we're going through it, and it's feeling like, yo, this is like Black Temple doing it in maybe early Wrath, or like if you're super geared out in Sunwell gear. We get up to Nagentis, and people actually die during the fight. I did not expect that. Nagentis is one of those fights also that's very important, and you have to realize that you don't want to have people that don't know what the fuck to do, because Nagentis, you basically like impale somebody, and you have to click the impale, and you get a spear, and you throw it on him whenever he puts the blue bubble around himself. So if you have a clown in your raid, the clown can pick up the spear and then just not use it on Nagentis, or if you have somebody who just doesn't know what they're doing, then they're not even trying to troll, they could just not know what's going on. And of course, if you're queuing up, you could be queuing with people with language barriers, like they could be speaking Portuguese because they're Brazilian, or Russian if you're in the EU. So I could see this creating a lot of problems unless people started doing it a lot, and it's going to create a lot of frustration for people, I think, if they don't kind of either reimagine that ability or make it only not directly queuable through a group finder system like LFR. So Nagensis, we had people die. It did a significant amount of damage. Whenever you break the bubble on Nagensis with the spear, it does a ton of damage to everybody in the raid, and it did like 60 to 70% of people's health, which is one of the good things about the scaling, is that Blizzard can make it very, very specific to how much damage each of these things is going to do, because they're pretty much creating a template for your character going into the dungeon, or the raid, actually. And so Supremus, the hardest part about Supremus was actually getting to the boss. Supremus has a number of like kind of interesting abilities. Like you have your 2 tanks, and you also have like your highest melee DPS on like threat, so it'd be like your 3rd on threat, takes these hateful strikes like Patchwork and Naxxramas. And so he was just one-shotting people right and left, because if it goes on like a plate wearer, obviously it's not going to kill them like a Fury Warrior, but if it goes on a Windwalker Monk, not so good. Also Supremus, he's like huge, he's fucking like, it's like really, really big, okay? So it's really kind of hard to run away from him whenever he does his like kind of, he'll fixate on people and also put volcanoes down, so you have to run away from him whenever you're fixated. That's very, very easily negated because tanks can of course intervene him if they're prot warriors, and also you can bot players. There's a number of ways you can get away from this fixate, but we had some people that didn't really know that, because I'm sure they probably didn't expect it was going to happen. Many of people here probably have only one-shot Supremus. They've never actually done it in progression, so I'm not holding it against anybody. So you have to kite them around, and that was relatively difficult, but after a few pulls and we got everybody alive and we didn't have any trash pulls at the same time, it was no big deal. Going into Akama's room, one thing that used to be really annoying whenever you'd have a Shade of Akama is that people could talk to Akama and immediately start the fight while all the trash was still active to troll people. We had that happen, which wasted a lot of time because Akama had a ton of extra health like he wasn't supposed to, and the Shade of Akama fight ended up lasting for like 10 or 20 minutes while we had already wiped. So we went and we did Terran Gorefiend, which Terran Gorefiend was like the first wall in Black Temple, because you used to get this ability or this debuff called Shadow of Death, and you have to run, like you have Terran like in that little alcove that he's at, and you take the Shadow of Death and you put it all the way in the corner, and then you have these 4 ants that spawn, and you basically acted like a frost mage rooting them and then using this Ice Lance ability to kill all 4 of them before they went and they killed your raid. Now it's very, very easy to do, and whenever you really compare the level of difficulty of all the mechanics that you would look at in Black Temple compared to something like Mythic Nighthold, there's no comparison at all. Black Temple is much more advanced than we saw in Molten Core, but even at the same time, that mechanic that we're seeing right now with Terran Gorefiend is something that anybody can pick up on very, very quickly, because a lot of people have that innate game knowledge, because many of them have played the game for many of years. Probably like there's a lot of people probably that I played with have played for like over 5 years at that point, so they understand the game on a very fundamental level. Now, I'm not sure how a new player would approach that, but even if you had the debuff go off in raid, it didn't even really kill anybody. The ads don't really do a whole lot of damage. So Terran Gorefiend's kind of like a DPS race. You have to burn him down before he kills enough players for it to be kind of a wipe. So then we went back, and I think we killed Shade of Akama. Shade of Akama was basically a loot pinata, even at level 70, and nothing has changed. It was very, very easy. Some of the things were a little bit unclear to me because I remember not having to deal with any mechanics, so I don't remember any of them. So we killed Shade of Akama. Then we went over to Reliquary of Souls. Now, Reliquary of Souls was the main boss. Like, whenever I didn't even really care about killing Illidan at level 70. The boss that I wanted to do was Reliquary of Souls. I thought it looked cool. I thought the idea was cool. I thought it was just completely awesome. So the first time I had a chance to do it at 70, I had a huge, really, really great time. And this is like kind of the same thing. it's not really that hard now. And again, the phase 2 of Reliquary of Souls was extremely difficult back in the day, and I'll explain why. There are 2 mechanics you had to deal with. First mechanic was the shield that had to be spell stolen. He also cast an ability called Deaden, and that would just interrupt it, not really that hard. And then he also casted an ability Spirit Shock, and back then interrupts were in the GCD, so you had to have people rotating back and forth doing interrupts on the boss, and you would cast this every 5 seconds. Interrupts were on a 10-second cooldown back then, so you had to have usually, what we did is we had 2 rogues rotating back and forth doing interrupts with other people doing backups. Now, because everybody basically has an interrupt, it's off the GCD, and interrupting mobs is so much more commonplace now, we never even had a single Spirit Shock go off. The phase 3 for Reliquary of Souls, which is usually kind of like the victory lap for the boss, where you just do increasingly more damage and he does AoE damage, was very, very easy as well. That was maybe even the hardest part of it, but even that, we never really got to a point where the AoE damage was unsustainable. The next boss, Gertog Bloodboil. Now, Gertog Bloodboil actually had a mechanic that was very, very difficult, even for its time, which was Acidic Breath. Now, Acidic Breath would target a random player in a raid, and that random player in the raid basically had to move away from the raid, or the raid had to move away from them. Usually we did both, where you kind of split apart to minimize the amount of people that would get hit by it, and it would put a dot on everybody that got hit by it, and it would do like 5,000 damage every like few seconds. And back then, whenever you only had like 10,000, at most 15,000 health, that was a lot, especially whenever you had the Blood Boil ability going off at the same time with a lot of extra raid damage. Now, Gertog also does a lot of massive tank damage, and so throughout this entire raid, we did the whole thing with 3 tanks and I think 3 healers. And the tanks were dying pretty rapidly in Gertog. And also, one thing that Gertog does, is the same thing he does in Hellfire High Council fight in Hellfire Citadel, is he targets a random player and he casts Fel Rage on them, where he does a lot of extra damage to that player. That player gains extra defensives and extra armor and health, and you have to spam heal that player with like Bop and like Aura of Sacrifice and everything like that to make sure that player doesn't die, and have them tank Gertog Bloodboil facing away so the cleave doesn't hit anybody else, and that player does substantially more damage to the boss. Now, the first time that happened, we weren't really ready for it. It caught us off guard, and it ended up killing the raid. But the second time that we did it, it was very, very sloppy kill. But we ended up we did end up killing the boss, although, as I said, it was not necessarily the best as it possibly could be. I would say that was probably the most difficult boss, was Gertog Bloodboil, because of the individual responsibility of not only moving out for Acidic Breath, but also being able to position Gertog in the right way and be able to use your defensives and rotate them, and the healers rotate defensives on the player that actually got on Fel Rage. So that probably will get nerfed. And all of the boss's health and damage, I think, will get nerfed by about 30%. I hope it won't, but I think it will. Now, going up to the last place, there's 3 more bosses. The third to last one was Mother Shiraz. Now, Mother Shiraz was the first actual gear check of Black Temple, because you needed to have your entire group in the Shadow Resistance gear, and the Shadow Resistant reagents that you needed to actually create the Shadow Resistance gear only dropped in the mobs in Black Temple. It was called Heart of Darkness. And also, I believe some of the patterns that you had to buy required a certain reputation with the Ashen Verdict, not Ashen Verdict, what was it Ashen? Ashtongue Deathsworn, I believe that was reputation, and you had to buy those, and so you had to farm Black Temple trash in order to buy this stuff, and you had to get the Hearts of Darkness. So obviously Blizzard's not going to expect people to have Shadow Resistance gear anymore. So completing this boss was actually very, very hard to do. She does basically 2 important abilities. She does Saber Lash, which is just something that you face the tanks away, and it's a cleave ability, and it's split between the amount of people that get hit by it, and there's like a baseline damage too, so you don't want to have like the whole raid soaking it. And also, she groups 3 players together, and they have to get apart, spread apart, because they're doing AoE raid damage to everybody around them, and it also does a lot of damage to them, and you just basically have to run away from each other really, really fast. I believe there's been a number of other mechanics similar to that. One mechanic that's like that is in Arcway. It's the spider boss, whenever it pulls 2 players together. Well, basically, now it's 3 players, and you just have to spread out, and if you don't, it does a lot of damage. And also the orb, or like the aura that's around each individual player, does a lot of damage as well. So that can be very, very difficult. Now, the the second last boss is the Illidari High Council, which I thought was going to be the hardest boss, but for whatever reason, the number values were not accurate, and it was extremely easy to do. Basically, the strategy used to be where you'd have a mage spell steal the mage in the fight, and then the mage would have to use fire spells, like I think it was Scorch, because Scorch generated extra aggro, and then hold the mage away, while spell stealing a debuff or buff that the mage cast on himself. The mage boss that reduced magic damage taken by 75%, so the mage could tank him more effectively than a normal tank. And then you have Gerathos the Shadower, and he was like the paladin, and you'd have to kite him around while he put down Consecrate on the ground, while at the same time watching out for the mage putting Flame Strike on the ground. And there's also a rogue that would run around and basically do nothing except for a backstab that wasn't a big deal. And then you also had a priest that you had a couple of melee assigned to dealing with, and she would cast 2 different abilities. She would cast a heal, which is very important, you had to interrupt, and she would also cast a shield that did reflective damage, so that had to be dispelled and also healed through and not attacked. So all of those mechanics didn't matter, and I just wasted about 30 seconds of your time because you guys can see it just died in like 3 seconds. Last boss, Illidan Stormrage. Now, Illidan Stormrage, I was expecting a completely awesome, badass fight. I think they should increase his health a little bit more, and the reason for that is because in Phase 3, there's a really, really interesting phase, the Demon Within phase. It's the same as the Mythical Dan phase that we have now, except for he goes into a Demon phase, and what you used to have to do is you used to have a Warlock cast, because Warlocks have a lot of self-healing, he would cast Searing Pain on Illidan to hold aggro on him because he cast a little orb, or not an orb, a bolt onto a random player, and it did AoE damage, and it had a very, very big radius, so you couldn't necessarily have a tank off-tanking him, and that Warlock would have on, I think it was Shadow or Fire Resistance gear, I forgot which one, and he would tank this bolt that Illidan would shoot, and each time the bolt would hit them, it would do progressively more fire damage. So all of that's basically out the window as well, because we were able to heroism in Phase 3, and that was no big deal. Whenever you start in fighting Illidan, he does 2 abilities. He does Shear, which requires active mitigation. That was taken out of the game because it used to do 60% of the tank's total health, but now it's no longer, it got taken out, and now since active mitigation is more of a thing, it was put back into the game, I believe, for this event. And he also casts Flame Crash, where he just puts a big circle of fire on the ground for the tanks. And also the melee that you just move him out of. It's very easy. Phase 2 happens, and he puts down his bolt as Warglaives. The 2 Flames of Azeroth spawn. You just AoE those, not really AoE those down, you just damage those down. Apparently they have some kind of a charge thing where they just like randomly attack a player. I don't remember that. I don't remember how that worked. But for us, it wasn't really too big of a deal. We only lost 2 players during that phase. And after you kill both the Flames of Azeroth, Illidan comes down, and he does basically the same things that he does in Phase 1. And also he casts Parasitic Shadow Fiends, which is something you just need to, basically if you get it, you just run away, and then you AoE down Shadow Fiends. It's the same as the Mythical Dan phase, very, very easy. It's kind of like an idiot check. You should never wipe the Shadow Fiends. And also, whenever he reaches like 20% health, Maiev comes up, he stuns you, there's a little bit of RP, and then the phase continues as normal. The only thing that I would really want to improve on with the Illidan phase is making sure that everybody got a chance to see the Demon Within phase, because I think it was probably one of the coolest and like most oh shit moments of the fight. And for most of the people that have even run Black Temple now, they never get to see that because you just one-shot them anyway. So overall, I had a very, very good time doing the raid. As I said before, it was very nostalgic, and honestly, it made me want to play WoW by doing it. Sometimes I forget, there's that. We've got like only 3 raids, right? We've got Emerald Nightmare, I was going to say Black Temple, now we won't, in 7.25. We have Emerald Nightmare, Trial of Hour, and Nighthold. We only really have 3 raids, but there's something like 30 or 40 raids in the whole game. And it would be awesome to be able to go back and do these raids at different times and be able to experience these old mechanics and do these old things, because even if it's not necessarily as difficult as it used to be, and it's not really a challenge, a lot of people don't really view Nightholds as a challenge, and it's something that you can go back, it adds variance, it adds variety, and I believe that it adds fun into the game. And so I think that the Black Temple Timewalking event was very, very successful. I think also that they should make each boss drop 50 time-worked badges. Dropping 5 badges? The fuck? Like, come on. Like, this thing's got like 20 million health. How are you gonna kill like a boss in like 3 hits in the normal 5-mans and get the same amount of badges as the raid? It's very, very it's very hard to get a group together. It's very hard to make all this stuff come together, and I feel like they could do a lot better. in terms of the rewards, and maybe they could incentivize it a little bit more. But I do think it's a very, very good first step for time walking raids. If this is what we can expect from time walking raids from Blizzard, they did a very, very good job tuning this, I would say. Most of the people in my group, of course, I only invited very, very high item level people because I thought that would correlate with general game knowledge. And many of the people that I played with were either like very, very high PvPers or high rated players in one facility or another. So for an average group, I do believe this will be difficult. Although I would like to see some, maybe if they ever did a time walking Old War, they could actually make the hard modes for Old War like legitimately fucking hard. And even for like current level gear and current level expansion, that would be really, really fun. And I would love to see that. I had a great time doing the Black Temple Time Walking raid, and I hope you guys had a good time watching it. So anyway, go ahead and let me know if you've done it yourself. I'd like to hear your feedback, and also make sure that Blizzard hears it as well, because I thought that it was really, really great, and I do think maybe they could make it a little bit harder, honestly, if they wanted to make the gear better, but I don't think that's really going to happen. I think it's going to be going in the other direction, unfortunately. That's pretty much all I got. Thanks for watching, and like, comment, subscribe.